Good day, everyone. Richard Cowperthwait for Northwest Access TV. Thanks for joining us. Very happy to have alongside someone I've known for many years around here, John Edwards. John, great to see you.
Good to be here.
Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, we've known each other for, 45, 50
I
years.
guess so. In fact, I'm coming up on my 50th year anniversary in Vermont. Hate to kind of go there in a way, but this November it'll be an even 50 years when the O'Sheas were good enough to take a chance on me and hire me at the County Courier. Unfortunately, no longer with us. Boy, tough day for journalism.
No,
tough
it is.
days.
I hate to see our local
Yeah.
papers and radio stations go by the wayside.
Tough. Yeah, we were talking. Of course, I logged a lot of time on good old WWSR, WLFE, and that's long gone.
Oh,
but
yes.
yeah, it's tough times. I should mention, I'm sure a lot of our viewers know John Edwards very well. Some folks, some of the younger staff here don't know you, but boy, where to start with John? Well, a Vermont native son, a Navy vet, former commander of the St. Albans State Police Barracks, a legislator, U.S. Marshal. Just a few things that come to mind. Also, local school board member in Swanton. Boy, John, a lot of stuff.
Yep.
A lot of stuff.
And I've enjoyed every bit of it.
Yeah, that's right. And again, you've had an incredible life, and I guess we were talking off air. You have a book out. I guess you'd call it a book, huh? Integrity, the John Edwards story, but Leon Thompson,
Leon.
author and former St. Albans Messenger reporter, I guess helped you with that. But it's good because I thought it was very well written and good outline of your life. But and you had been thinking about doing that for a long time.
Yes, I had for several years. Family and people that I worked with, former colleagues, had insisted or talked to me about doing that, and I put it off, and finally I decided to do it. And I did it really for my family.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm hoping future generations, and when they
What
say,
a great thing to do. More people should probably be thinking about
yes,
doing
I
that.
agree, but they're going to say, well, who's this John Edwards? That was my great grandfather, or
Yeah.
something like that. And
Wow.
somebody can dig that out and
Yeah.
show it to them.
That's great. That's great. You got that done. So again, a Vermont native, grew up in Rockingham,
Yes.
down Bellows Falls area.
Yeah, I went to high school in Bellows Falls.
Huh.
Grew up on a dairy farm.
Wow.
We had a lot of acreage, but like a lot of things down there, not much of it was tillable. Probably out of 600 acres, maybe 50 was really tillable to any degree.
Wow.
And we had registered jerseys,
Wow.
probably the best Jersey farm in the state.
No, my kid's mother, Ian's mother, Jennifer Bright, who you know well,
Yeah.
and of course Anna, her mother was
Yeah.
a great friend of yours.
Yeah,
Jennifer's always been a big Jersey girl.
yeah. No,
So, boy, in fact, that gets me thinking about dairy farms. But have you got any memory of how many dairy farms there were in Vermont at that time? We're talking, obviously, many thousands.
yes, there were. And, I remember that there were, at the time, it would be a small farm now, but we had what was the time one of the bigger farms.
How many cows were you milking then?
Well, we milked 60 and had about 100 head.
Boy, that does sound like a very big farm at that time.
But there were, I'll say hundreds, but many, many small hill farms
Wow.
around. And, they did it with, a dozen to 20 cows,
Yeah,
shipped a little bit of milk.
yeah,
Oftentimes, either the mother or father would work in town in one of the mills.
wow,
And, but, I think it was the 50s that regulations came out that the milk houses had to have concrete floors.
yeah,
And essentially you had to have bulk tanks because they stopped using cans.
yeah,
And that did away, or that and other things did away with a lot of the hill farms.
yeah,
And I remember some of those hill farms. They sold for, between $2,500 and $5,000. Contiguous to a ski area sometimes.
yeah.
And they were priceless, really.
Wow. Boy, I hate it. I kind of cringe when I see the number of dairy farms in Vermont. Probably, the under 500 now, 400 and something.
Yes, it's
Incredible. Although I guess milk production stays pretty stable because just bigger farms
yeah,
keep
bigger farms.
buying up the smaller ones.
They buy up their neighbors and,
Yeah.
yeah,
But geez, under 500 is,
it doesn't seem possible.
yeah. Of course, coming off another Vermont Dairy Festival this last weekend. Got some of the Dairy Fest. I should know we're taping this show on Wednesday, June 11th. So yeah, what a difference on the farming front. So you milk your share of cows when you were
Oh,
a
yes.
kid.
Yeah, I did. And the last couple of years of high school, my grandfather took ill with cancer, and so I'd get up at 3:30 in the morning and milk,
Wow.
and
Wow.
get up and go to school.
Wow.
I'd usually come in and shower because nobody wanted me in school
Yeah.
after spending time in the barn.
Wow. At that point, were you thinking about maybe being a dairy farmer later in life, or were you thinking just no, that's or not
Well,
that at
that's
all?
kind of a funny question.
Yeah.
Back then, most young men, and very frankly, I didn't have good grades.
Yeah.
So really, you had a couple of choices. You could go in the military,
Yeah.
or you could go to work in one of the shops.
Yeah.
You could join, the National Guard or something. But, so I graduated from high school one week and left for the Navy the following week.
Wow. Interesting.
So, and it was a good move for me.
Yeah. So Navy worked out. That was a good move. Good thing to do.
Yes, I brought up on an isolated
Wow.
country farm, and
Yeah.
but I got in the Navy and realized that I could compete with, we had young men from all over the world, or
Yeah.
not all over the world, but from all over the country. And, I held my own with them, and so when I got out, I was, more apt to, stretch my wings, so to
Yeah.
speak.
And when did you join the Navy? What year are we talking?
1960.
1960. Interesting. Did you think about being career Navy, or was that pretty easy to think you wouldn't do a career with the Navy?
Well, I was very young,
Yeah.
and I didn't have any, I didn't have a steady girlfriend or anything, but I knew nature being what it was, and
Yeah.
would probably want to have a family.
Yeah.
And I knew the Navy, where you spent, we'll say out of 10 years, you'd spend 7 of them at sea.
Wow. Yeah.
So that kind of, wouldn't be good for family life.
So about three years in the Navy for
Yes,
you?
yeah.
Interesting. So when you got out of the Navy, again, you ended up, of course, in law enforcement. Was that on your mind at that point, or did that take a while?
No, I got out of the Navy, and I went back to the farm, and I worked on that for a little less than a year.
Huh.
And by happenstance, I heard an ad on the radio
Huh.
for the state police.
Really?
And at that time, I didn't know a single law enforcement officer.
So nothing you'd even
No, I'd
thought
never
about?
even contemplated, but I thought, well,
Huh.
what the heck, I'll give it a try.
Really?
So I did. I went through the process, and
Huh.
and it worked out for me anyway.
Interesting. So you heard a radio ad. That's where that came from.
Yes.
Wow. And you start work down in the Rockingham. Where'd you start with VSP?
Right here in St.
And
Albans.
so you started in St. Albans and ended up coming back later on.
They had a policy at the time, I think, where they sent new recruits about as far away from their home
really?
territory as they could
Interesting.
send you.
Oh,
And
is that right?
coming from the southeast part of the state, they
Yeah.
sent me to the northwest. So,
Interesting. So you started here in St. Albans.
yeah, and it was a blessing. I came up here, and Red Vodier was the officer in charge.
I absolutely remember Red. In fact, I can go back to a bank robbery in Enosburg
Yes.
Falls with,
Yep.
yeah.
And so I came up here, and they never sent me to an academy.
Oh, really?
Really, there
So
was
nothing
about 10 of us.
Oh,
It
really?
had been 3 or 4 years since they'd taken on any new troopers.
Oh, really?
And when they ran their next academy, I think we had 3 new troopers here that would have been assigned to that.
Huh.
I mean, and I think we only had maybe a half a dozen troopers in total here.
Yeah.
So anyway, we used to do what they call on-the-job training. They'd assign you to ride with a senior officer.
Wow. Was Red Vody, was he a pretty good boss guy for you?
Yeah, I loved Red.
Love Red.
Yeah, I know his reputation.
Yeah.
But and I got a few scars left that I earned when he chewed me out.
Yeah.
But no, he was a great boss, and if you were right, boy, he'd back you to the hilt.
Yeah.
And he never asked you to do something that he
Interesting.
hadn't done or wouldn't do.
Well, I love hearing that about bosses.
You know,
Yeah.
really, it was a good. I really liked working for Red. And he assigned me to ride with Truman Way.
Truman Way, of course, ended
Yeah,
up as
and,
police chief for St. Albans City for a while.
And Truman and I became best friends.
Huh.
But I learned a lot from Truman.
Yeah.
I mean, he was an officer who tried to de-escalate any situations.
Yeah. And I think you inherited that, or it sounds like that was your
Yeah.
MO down the road.
Yeah, it was. But I learned that
Really?
from Truman.
Wow.
And he was a good mentor.
So after St. Albans, so you moved around some in the state. You weren't here all the time, of course.
So I stayed here until 1970. I got promoted, assigned to the Rutland Barracks,
Yeah.
and I decided I would live in Castleton so that I could go to the college out there,
Oh,
which
really?
I did.
Wow.
The department was really good to us. They let us go when we were working as long as we were available,
Huh.
and as long as we made up the time.
Really?
And
And what'd you pick up? So you picked up a degree at Castleton, or?
yeah, I picked up a BS degree in
Really?
Castleton. Yeah.
Wow. That's right. At that point, when you were hired by state police, academic one, did you just need to be like a high school grad?
That's all you needed.
Just a high school graduate. What's the story today, out of curiosity? Do you need way more than, do you know?
I don't really
Don't
know,
even really know.
but I suspect that more and more of them have
Yeah.
at least an associate, if not a bachelor's or higher.
Well, I'm sure we could be talking about just law enforcement issues forever, but boy, I got to think you got to be pretty discouraged by the situation at this. I mean, I know Bill Sheets at Swanton Village, of course, a former VSP guy, of
Yeah.
course, village manager, interview Bill and the Swanton folks periodically, and he'll just mention numbers to me, just how many, the state's down, how many troopers and stuff, and just with different controversies, you don't see a lot of young people
No.
apparently thinking about getting into law
Well,
enforcement.
yeah, it's,
Got to be really discouraging, I would think.
oh, it is. And, but it's if a young person decides to do it,
Yeah.
at least for me, it was a great career.
Yeah,
And I loved most every day, like any job, you have days that
sure.
you wished you didn't have. But I really enjoyed it.
Wow.
And my association with the community.
Yeah.
That's what I really thrived on.
And it sounds like that's always been a very important thing for you.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would think that it would seem to make sense too. It would seem to, I would think, make your job easier the better you know your local community.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I did. I think I had a lot of credibility with local folks.
Yeah.
And no, I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the association with even folks that you wouldn't think would be a friend of law enforcement, but we tended to get
Yeah,
along.
we can get into that probably a little later with the Abenaki folks in Homer St. Francis, who I had some interesting times in my reporting career with.
Yeah.
But back to Rutland. So Paul Lawrence is one of the folks you crossed paths with, and when you were in Rutland.
Yes, I did. I got down to Rutland, and at the time, Paul was I would call him a freelancer, and he answered only to the troop commander.
Really?
And he worked. He had authority from the troop commander to work anywhere in the state. He primarily worked in the southern counties, but he was an abomination.
Really?
He
And for
really-
folks who don't pick up that name, I think most people would, but Paul Lawrence later became kind of the infamous road cop who had the issue in St. Albans and with a book, Hamilton Davis's fine book, Mocking Justice, about
That was a
him.
great book.
Yeah, it was funny. It was just before my time. I blew into town in November 1975, and I think I might have called one of the last court hearings with him, but they finally got to this
Yeah,
guy.
they finally, put him to rest, so to
But
speak.
so you saw early on you were not
Oh,
impressed with this guy.
Oh, no, he didn't have any credibility
Really?
with fellow troopers.
Is that right?
I mean, Paul wrote a lot of search warrants, dealing with drugs.
So it
and-
sounds like some of the same stuff he was doing in
Here.
St. Albans he was doing before.
Same MO, no, he didn't change.
Same MO, really.
And so you'd go in, you'd do a search, and sometimes you'd go into a bedroom and you'd search a bureau drawer.
Yeah.
You wouldn't find anything. And before you left, lo and behold, Paul would walk in there,
Really?
say, "Oh my God, you missed whatever
That's
it was."
Is that right?
Yeah.
So this is going on, and what year are we talking about in Rutland when you first met him, roughly?
I went there in 1970.
That's 70. So so a few years before I guess he came up here.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had a lot of history from the 70s. And
But that's incredible. So
it is.
Wow.
And I know that the people out of our headquarters came down one day and had a meeting with the troop commander and all the supervisors that were assigned to the Rutland barracks.
Yeah.
And Poljacek, that was the troop commander, refused to change anything.
Wow.
And I remember walking out of that meeting, and one of my colleagues, I stood there and I said, "We're all going to be out of this office shortly."
Wow.
And it turned out that was true,
That
with
was
the
the case.
exception of me.
Really?
Every one of the supervisors was out of there in the fall. Lawrence was there for a short while.
Did you want to get out of there yourself, or not your decision to make, or?
No, well, of course, it wasn't it wasn't my decision to make. When you sign on, you agree to serve wherever they place you.
Yeah.
But but anyway, if you want to go into the feral distributing thing,
Huh.
I was the only supervisor left in Rutland when this happened.
Right. Really.
And I remember getting a call at, I don't know, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And the dispatcher said, "Paul is out at Farrell Distributing," which was in Center Rutland,
Yeah.
a warehouse for a beer distributor.
Yeah.
And there's people inside, and they shot out the windows of his cruiser.
Wow.
Well, but my first reaction to my wife was, "What stupid thing is this SOB done now?"
Yeah.
It turned out that was the right attitude, the right thing to say. But anyway, I got up, got dressed, went to Center Rutland. You could see where there was a window missing out of their Farrell Distributing office. There was bullet slugs in Paul's car. Window had been shot out,
Wow.
and he claimed they were inside.
Wow.
Anyway, we gathered some other law enforcement people, and anyway, we put in enough tear gas in there, I swear to God, to float Farrell Distributing to Burlington.
Really.
But after a while, you said that there's nobody in there.
Wow.
So anyway, we opened the door and went in, and there was nobody in there.
Nobody in there.
But then it went on a year or two after that, and there was a detective down there
Yeah.
named Lee Jones. And Lee was doing investigations on a series of burglaries. And he ended up arresting a couple of guys.
Huh.
And they told him the story, at least from their point of view, about what happened.
Wow.
They said they were trying to break into Farrell Distributing.
Yeah.
They had a night deposit thing with the chute sticking out of the side of the building.
Yeah.
They put a rope around that and hoped to pull the safe out and then break into it at their leisure somewhere. And they said next thing they know, Lawrence, turned out Lawrence had, in the meantime, had run over there was a bank there with a sluice in it or something.
Yeah.
And so they had gone over there. But they said the next thing they know, Lawrence pulls a shotgun out of his car,
Huh.
shoots into Farrell Distributing, shoots his own, his own vehicle.
Wow.
And so that's,
Wow.
that was just, but that was pure Paul,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, gee, that's incredible. That's new news for me.
It was,
Wow.
And one of my other colleagues, as a supervisor there at the time, on Friday nights, we had a 4-lane highway from New York into West Rutland,
Yeah.
Route 4.
Yeah.
And they'd go out and run radar, do a little traffic enforcement.
Huh.
And he said, when I started doing that, he says, Paul would take the radar, and then you had a vehicle down the road, and he'd call in and say, a 72 Chevrolet, whatever.
Yeah.
So he said he'd get the people stopped, and at that time, we generally put the driver in the car. They don't do that anymore.
Huh.
And Don would get speaking to him, and they'd say, I was speeding, but I wasn't doing anywhere near the speed
Yeah.
that I'm being charged with.
Yeah.
And he said that happened a fair amount.
Jeez.
So he got to the point that he wouldn't let Lawrence run the radar anymore. It was
I
just
mean, that's just sad to hear
Yeah,
with that
it's-
track record that he lasted that
yeah,
long.
and it all started with the troop commander because
Really.
he backed him up on everything.
Wow.
We did a
Did
personnel.
the troop commander thought this was legitimate stuff, or who
I
knows?
guess
or-
Paul was obviously his golden boy.
Yeah.
And anyway, every year we had to do personnel evaluations.
Huh.
And so there were 3 first-line supervisors there at the time, and we made one up on Paul that was less than laudatory.
I bet.
Took it in, gave it to the troop commander, and he took one look at it and tore it up.
And said what, he'd write his own, or?
Yeah, he said
or
he
the
would
book?
he would write one himself,
Wow.
and he did.
Wow.
So
See, that's incredible.
you could go on with stories about Paul.
Yeah, yeah. Well, kudos to, I guess, Senator Leahy, then
Oh,
with Chittenden
yeah.
County State's Attorney
Yeah.
Pat Leahy figured in, and our own Senator Randy Brock had a
Yeah.
role in finally
And
getting to the bottom of this.
And your former chief here, Dave DeMag.
And Dave DeMag, great guy.
Yeah,
Right,
he is.
Chief
Yeah,
DeMag, too.
yeah. Dave succeeded me as U.S.
In
Marshal.
fact, I was just remembering that.
Yeah, no, Dave's a great guy.
Yeah, great guy.
Very, very honest and credible. And,
Yeah.
and
Well, he came through. I've been in the same house in St. Albans City for about 40 years now. And I had a neighbor who was actually one of my former tenants who bought the house across from my house, and a good guy. But he was renting out the other side of the duplex to some young folks.
Yeah.
And they were just starting to drive me crazy. Obvious underage drinking.
Yeah.
And I finally called up Chief DeMag one time when he was the St. Albans chief and mentioned that, and thank you very much. They dealt with that situation and never an issue
They
again.
took care of it, huh?
Yeah.
Well, that's
No,
great.
A good guy.
Yeah.
So when did you get back to St. Albans with VSP, John?
Well, let's see, from Rutland, I got assigned first to the police academy as an instructor.
Huh.
And I get up there, and lo and behold, who's the commander of the police academy? But John Poljacek, who'd been the troop commander.
In Rutland.
Yeah. So anyway, went along, and I was less than happy there.
Huh. Because of that, or just in general? Was
Well,
that-
the whole tenor of the
that right?
it was not good.
Sounds like the police academies had some issues at times too.
Yeah, I think they have.
Yeah.
So anyway, I put in for a transfer, and I got transferred to St. Johnsbury.
Huh.
And I really liked working in the Northeast Kingdom.
I love the kingdom. I'm lucky enough to have
I
a
did.
camp
I loved
out
the
there. I
people
love the
up there.
kingdom.
It
Yeah.
was great.
Yeah.
And I was up there a couple of years, and there was another officer who lived up there, and had been assigned to the Shaftesbury office.
Huh.
But anyway, the department let us for a couple of summers. I started working out of the Shaftesbury office, and this guy would work back up in the kingdom.
Yeah.
And so that worked out. But I loved working at the in
Yeah.
the kingdom. So
So did they transfer you to St. Albans, your next
next
and
stop
last
was,
stop?
in 1977,
Huh.
they had mandatory retirement that had been put in place at age 55.
Is that still the same age now?
Yes, I think it is.
Or do you think that should be later than that or not? Is that?
No, I think law enforcement is a young person's,
Gotcha.
to me, you don't want old people out there.
Yeah.
Somehow, as we get older, we may not see things that a
Yeah.
younger person
So that still
should.
sounds like about the right age.
Yeah, I think it's reasonable.
Yeah.
And so anyway, get back here and Red had he'd turned 55 or maybe
Oh,
50.
really?
Anyway, he was over the age.
Yeah.
So he retired in end of October, and I arrived here in the 1st of November
And became, as a commander,
as a
became
station
commander.
commander. But kind of a little side story.
Yeah.
When I was a trooper up here,
Yeah.
there was a individual in Swanton that I arrested a number of times, but ended up primarily with him for domestic abuse type things, or he and his wife would. So I pick up the phone after I arrived there. Georgie Rinaldi was still the dispatcher there.
Huh.
And he says, "John, where you been?" I said, "Oh, I'm back, Tommy." Anyway, it was like old home week,
that
like
right?
I never left, because
Really? And someone you had dealt with a number of times.
number of times, I'd arrested him a number of times.
I'd say that speaks very well of you, John.
But anyway, yeah. Oh, you're back. But a little side story on that. When I was still a trooper up here, I lived on Spring Street in Swanton,
Yeah.
and I signed on for the night shift, and they said, "Can you go over to Second Street where Tommy's living?" And there's a domestic over there. Oh, okay, so I drove right over there. And I get into the house, and he was married to a gal that had some, she was as big or if not bigger than Tommy.
Really?
I don't mean she was fat or anything, but she
Yeah.
was rugged.
Big girl.
And I get in there, and she hauled off and cold cocked him.
Really?
I says, "All right, Norma." And Tommy, of course, he retaliated, and I took the whole damn family to jail.
Really?
I called her parents to pick up the kids, but on the way into jail, she says, "Mr. Edwards, are you really going to put me in jail?" I says, "Yes, Norma, that's where we're going." And I don't know until I got transferred if we ever heard from him again.
Is that right?
But it was it was good therapy to take her,
So station commander here in St. Albans, John, and that's of course when I certainly got to know you with my reporting days and stuff, got to know you pretty well, and you're always you guys were always good folks to deal with and stuff. So how long is a station commander in St. Albans
Let's
for you?
see, 77, 80, 12 years.
That's 12 years.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And I really loved being station commander.
Yeah.
I loved, the troopers we had working here.
How many troopers did you typically have at that point?
Well, I think when I got here, I don't know, there might have been 8 or 10.
Yeah, something like that.
And by the time I left, I don't know, there was north of 15.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Boy, they'd kill for that today. Are we talking, we're talking today, under 10 troopers, I assume now, or?
I don't know
even
a single
sure.
trooper. I've been out of it for 30
From
years.
Bill Shee, it just sounds
Yeah,
like
well,
statewide,
Bill is
BSP is
lo-
just way
A
down.
lot closer to the what's going on than I am.
And that was with coverage in Franklin and Grand Isle counties?
Franklin,
Two
Grand Isle,
counties?
Yeah.
Yeah,
But, when I was a trooper here, sometimes you worked both counties alone.
yeah, right, really,
You'd be in South Hero and get a call to go to Montgomery.
wow,
You had to stop and get gas on the way
Right.
because you've already put on.
right. Typically, is that maybe the case now? Typically, and late at night, were there no troopers actively on duty, obviously on call, or In those
Well,
days, was there always someone out
No,
and about?
our night shift ran 5 till 2:30.
5 to
But if-
2:30?
You know, at that time, troopers didn't qualify for any overtime.
Oh, is that right?
Oh,
No
yeah,
OT?
no overtime.
Wow.
And it wasn't unusual for us to be out till, 3:30, 4 o'clock.
I bet.
And, and that was unusual, what I told you about, being all alone going to,
Wow.
South Hero to Montgomery or Richmond.
Yeah, yeah.
But thank God back then, and there were far fewer Border Patrol officers.
I was just
around.
going to ask you if you were getting some help from, say, the Border Patrol
Yeah,
back
but,
then,
but
far
they,
fewer.
they had far fewer.
Yeah.
I forget what Richford had. They had 2 or 3 Border Patrol agents
Really?
up there, and there weren't many out of the Swanton's
Really?
headquarters.
Wow.
But they were a godsend, and from what I read, they still are.
No, it sounds like that's a great relationship.
Oh, it
So,
is. Yeah, it benefits both of us.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, John. It's funny what you remember. I can flash back to maybe my one time, maybe lucky me that I was in the late, not so great Hotel Riviera in Swanton. Now, maybe fortunately no longer with us. But I can literally flash back to a murder there, and when I showed up, you coming out with the handcuffed murder suspect.
Yeah.
I think I can flash back to that scene whenever that was.
Yeah, that was a long time ago.
Wow.
Yeah, that was back in the 80s.
Yeah, I guess
because
80s
I was still
sometime.
here.
Yeah.
But there was an interesting thing on that. I think your memory may be a little short on coming out with the suspect because,
Yeah.
anyway, we knew who did it because, well, you just did. And anyway, we looked all over for him
Oh, so maybe no suspect right away.
right
then.
away. So I go home and it's probably 7, 8 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
I get a call and it's the suspect's sister.
The suspect's sister.
He says, if you will pick him up,
Wow.
he'll surrender to you
Wow.
and only you.
Wow.
So anyway,
Interesting. You did just
he
that.
was staying down at the bay.
Really?
I got in my car and I drove down to the bay and picked him up.
Wow. Yeah. Maybe I just went over there and just saw you walking out. Then.
Well,
Interesting.
whatever, but
Yeah.
anyway, like I say, I got a call from his sister, and because we'd had an association,
Wow.
yeah,
Well, again, that speaks very well of you, obviously.
I just, if you'll go down and get him, he'll come out and surrender to you.
Yeah.
And
And I
we
guess,
did.
well, before we get on to your legislative days, again, the Abenakis, of course, I can flash back to the fish-ins and stuff.
Yeah.
And Chief Homer St. Francis is not the easiest guy for me to get along with, but anyway, but it sounds like you fared okay with Homer, and I guess a good relationship. I mean, not the easiest guy to deal with, but, smart on your part to have a relationship with him, and it sounds like you were probably, the one cop that he could civilly deal with, maybe.
When I had arrested Homer a few times
Yeah.
when I was a trooper,
Yeah.
and we always got along.
Yeah.
Even when I was arresting him.
Uh,
Back up and I'll tell you a story about that.
yeah.
Homer had been involved in 2 or 3 assaults in different bars one night, and I was a trooper here. And so anyway, we get him stopped in the square in Village in Swanton, and so he says, "Okay, John, I'll come along." And I had another trooper with me, but he says, "I don't want any handcuffs." Well, I thought I knew him well enough
Yeah.
to say that would work.
Even though technically you should have handcuffed
Oh,
him.
yes, I should have handcuffed him. But he says, "I don't want that SOB constable." You know who I'm talking about?
No, this is in your book. This is an incredible story.
So I said, "Okay." And I told the constable, "Stay here. Everything's under control.
Yeah.
We're going down to Franklin County Jail."
In
But-
St. Albans City, of course, on Lincoln Ave.
Yes. And if you recall, when you got to the jail, we used to drive north on Lincoln Avenue, and you drive up right beside the steps leading up to the jail.
Yeah.
So we pull up to the steps, I get Homer out of the car, and here comes these headlights coming up by the court. And the next thing you know, this guy gets out and he pulls out his revolver and he starts firing.
That's unbelievable. He starts firing.
Yes. Oh, I said,
I mean, you could have been hit as easily as
yeah, I could have been
Homer.
hit as Homer or anybody else that was in the area.
That's unbelievable.
So anyway, I flushed him out of the area.
Jeez.
I looked around and checked with Homer to see if he was okay.
Yeah.
But I looked down at his shoes,
Yeah.
and they were covered with what I first thought was blood.
Blood.
Turned out to be red paint. He'd been doing a painting job. I said, "Oh my God!"
Did anything happen to? I mean, that's an unbelievable story.
Nothing, you know.
The constable, nothing happened to this guy.
Nothing happened. I mean, you're talking now 50 years ago now. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
You know, you got out of the car, and there was no reason for him to do that. Homer didn't threaten the soul.
Yeah.
We were getting along fine.
Yeah.
And there he gets out and starts firing.
Yeah.
I just, it was, yeah.
Well, it sounds like you were, a very important person. There were certainly tensions. I remember them only too well between Abenakis and the community. It sounds like your presence helped keep that at a lower level, whatever, than it otherwise
Yeah.
would have been.
I'd like to think so.
Yeah.
I made a point when I came back here as station commander.
Yeah.
I'd stop over at the tribal headquarters.
Yeah.
I'd bring some donuts. I don't know why I brought donuts, because Homer's wife made some of the best. I mean,
Is that
and us
right?
cops know donuts,
Really?
if we know anything. And but anyway, I'd bring over some donuts, and he'd make a cup of coffee, and we'd sit
Yeah.
there and talk. And I call it pontificating. Homer would
Yeah.
pontificate for a while.
Yeah.
When I got ready to leave, he'd give me some literature, and I'd leave. And then I would stop at his house.
Wow.
And I always
on Liberty Street.
on Liberty Street. And so I'd go in, get a much better cup of coffee there, and I'd get some of Patsy's donuts. And it was, but you know, I always thought that law enforcement, if you got a relationship before tension happens,
Yeah.
you're better off.
That sure makes sense to me, obviously.
You know, it was just what we did. We
You
had
think there's less thinking on about that these days, or who knows?
I don't know,
Who
but
knows?
you know, I would say anybody that's got a contentious issue somewhere, if they can develop a relationship
Yeah.
with that person, you know, that doesn't always work, but
Yeah.
it does sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to flash to the legislature. So did you, you were station commander for about 12 years. At that point, did you hit retirement age or anything after St. Albans?
No, our headquarters in their wisdom made me the detective lieutenant for the northwest part of the state.
Oh, well,
What is
so,
it?
a promotion, I guess, right?
Well,
Kind of, anyway.
because I loved it here, I didn't think it was a promotion.
So you weren't particularly thrilled with that?
No, I was not.
But no choice, you had to
No, you know,
do what they tell you
you
to
know,
do.
you go to work for somebody and you do what they tell you, pretty much.
And was that your last job with VSP, or?
Yes.
Yeah.
well,
How
it's,
many, a couple more
I
years?
did 3 years,
Oh, really?
but again, I think we had, you know, pretty successful years.
Yeah.
And great detectives working for me.
And you kept living in Swanton at that point?
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I didn't have to move. We had a group of really good detectives, but one was named Leo Blaze.
Huh.
I don't know if that name rings a bell with you.
Huh. So it seems like I can think of a lawyer, Norman Blaze, is that?
Yeah,
kin
there is
to-
a Norm Blaze that's a
Yeah.
lawyer in Burlington,
Huh, yeah,
but this is Leo Blaze,
okay,
and he was a really good detective. And there'd been a murder down there of a school teacher,
wow,
and couldn't ever find her body.
huh,
And the suspect was a guy who was a fellow teacher by the name of Malinowski.
huh,
And as time goes on, Leo and his wife would go to Arizona every winter for a couple of weeks vacation. So anyway, he goes to Arizona, and I get a call one morning, and he says, I got a lead on Malinowski. Do I have your permission to follow up on it? And he explained what the lead was, and I said, sure, go for it. Anyway, he ended up going up to L.A., ended up arresting the guy. They found several thousand, apparently the guy had gotten into selling, getting a supply list somewhere for high-grade marijuana. And he had several $1,000s on him, so they confiscated that.
Yeah.
They brought him back to Chittenden County, and it went on for, of course, those kinds of trials, processes take time. And anyway, eventually it ended up where they did a plea bargain with him, and he got a really short jail sentence with the caveat that he would take us to the body.
Interesting.
So anyway, we go down to Cabot, and there's a road between Cabot and Calais. And so we go up in there, and we spent, I don't know, a couple of weeks there. And the guy was with us, and I think he was being sincere on finding the body, but we couldn't find it. So anyway, we were all set to close it down, and we had a backhoe, and we had everything up there.
Yeah.
Anyway, they were taking one more sweep, found the
And
body,
finally
found the
found it.
body.
Wow.
And that was, that was great for her family.
Yeah.
Because
you get some closure
we
on
got some
this?
closure on it, yeah. And anyway, we brought him, back, and the court proceedings went on, and I forget what he got, but, it was important for the family to close that up.
Wow. So flashing ahead, again, became involved or stayed involved in the Swanton community, school board member on Swanton Elementary School Board, later NVU.
Yes,
And then I guess our good friend, Mr. Ted Tyler, was, I think, you mentioned in the book, kind of a key figure in saying, John, I think you'd be a good person for the Vermont House, for the legislature. And lo and behold, I guess you ran and first elected in 1994.
yes. Yeah.
Wow. Had that been on your mind at all?
It had.
It had.
I always liked politics.
Yeah.
And anyway, so when Ted approached me, and I'd always been at least a moderate Republican.
Yeah.
And so I said, yeah, I'll give it some thought. And when the time came, I decided to do it.
And fared very well. Elected in 1994, re-elected in 96 and 98. And then to flash ahead, the kind of the momentous year of 2000 comes up.
Yeah.
Which you get into a lot. And of course, for folks who read 7 Days, a month or so ago, their cover story on the 25th year anniversary of the civil unions.
Yeah.
And you were, a key person. I guess everybody in the legislature, but you were on a key committee at that point. And I guess that was the committee you wanted to be on, House Judiciary Committee.
House Judiciary.
And you folks, that was really the key legislative committee dealing with civil unions.
Yeah,
And
that's where they sent the issue.
That's where they sent the issue.
Yeah.
Wow. And again, this of course comes in the wake of the year before Supreme Court decision.
Right. Well, actually, it'd come up at the end of December.
At the end of December.
Yeah, is when they made their decision.
Wow.
And I said, oh, no.
Wow. I forget, I'm around, I was kind of in my last kind of regular reporting days. That issue really hadn't, before the Supreme Court decision, there had been some talk about it, but it wasn't really an issue that had gotten much, if any, attention.
No, not
seemingly.
really. I think, I knew that there was a case before the court.
Yeah,
I knew that lower courts had maintained, just for heterosexuals.
yeah,
And so it did, it was a bombshell when
Yeah.
it came out at the end of December, and then the Legislative Council sent me a copy of the decision, and anyway, since then it's history, so to speak.
yeah. Here's what this is just from the 7 Days story, just one paragraph. As he said, late December. Then came the December 20th, 1999 bombshell from the Vermont Supreme Court. Excluding gay couples from marriage violates the state constitution. Fix it or we will. Merry Christmas.
Yeah.
Go ahead. So you folks became immersed in that, and I mean, you touched on this meeting. It's a meeting I'll never forget. The meeting at BFA later on. I guess you were hoping to have folks, hear, civil conversation on what in the issue you were grappling with. And I'll never forget that meeting. Emerson Lynn still punches at it for the messenger who treated me very well. Let me write a column for him for years. It's funny, I was doing freelancing for the Free Press, and I remember calling him up, and maybe they were OD'd on that story, but they didn't want the story. I mean, that's the most intense meeting I've ever been to, and my memory is it was a lynch mob mentality.
I was really disappointed with the Free Press during that whole
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
They stayed away from it.
But boy, that meeting, I mean, I was concerned about, I hope legislators get out of here, alive. It was an incredibly intense meeting.
It was. Never been in anything like that.
Yeah, but anyway, it finally came to a vote, and again, you spent obviously a lot of time on this, but in the end, you came down and decided, it was a pretty clear decision for you that you were voting for this?
Yes, it was.
Yeah,
I came to believe that, number one, it was constitutionally correct.
yeah,
I think that the court decision had laid that out pretty
Yeah.
succinctly. And I came to believe that morally,
Yeah.
it was the right thing to do.
wow. Did you know at that point that you were basically signing your political, at least at the time, death warrant, so to speak? Was that obvious? Did
Well,
you know?
I knew that from the beginning.
So that was
You
good.
know, I think I knew this community pretty well.
Yeah, and this is what, Swanton and Alberg? We
Swanton and Alberg at the time, but
Two-member
it
district.
would have been true anywhere in the
Sure,
county.
Sure. Sure.
And, no, I understood that.
Wow. Well, good for you. I mean, you run into some people who say legislators should follow the will of the constituents, do what they want, but it seems to me it should always be a mix. If obviously, you think they're wrong and you're right, you gotta do what you gotta do at times.
Yep.
Anyway, and of course, in your case, John, as you well know, of course, Al Perry went down also.
Yeah,
I
he
saw Al the other day, in fact. Great guy.
Oh, just
Incredible
he and his
naval
wife
career.
just-
Marsh Notch comes to mind.
Yeah,
Perry's a great folks.
They've done so much for Richford and that end of the county.
Yeah, but Al Perry was another, maybe the only other, I forget about the county in general, but anyway.
Probably.
Maybe the only
Yeah.
other pro-civil unions vote. And of course, he didn't even make it through the primary. Al lost in the general election, although he did come back a term or two later.
Yeah, he did.
But no, that was an incredibly intense issue. So again, you'll obviously, that issue never goes away.
No, there's not a day
Is that right?
that goes by that I don't think of it. A lot of the people on that committee, and
Yeah.
we stay in touch,
Yeah.
get together
Yeah.
periodically,
Yeah,
and we all agree it was a very intense time.
yeah,
Here I was, a guy from a very small town,
yeah,
and some national media was in to
sure,
interview, and
yeah,
I don't know why they picked me, but they seem to.
yeah. And also, I should note in that 7 Days story, which I'm sure some of our viewers read, Jason Barney also got
Yeah.
some attention
Yeah.
as what the then, maybe about the youngest legislator in Vermont ever, but representing at least Highgate,
Yeah.
a young Republican legislator
Yeah.
who voted against that. And the story notes, and I know Jason, he's joined us here on
Yeah.
the set here on a number of our election shows, but regrets that vote, says he, yep, I made a mistake. He's very, very open about that.
And he was, my recollection is that shortly after, he wished he could
Yeah,
do it over.
yeah. Boy, so do you run into some folks who vilified you then? I mean, did you even were you even getting like death threats about that, or not quite to
I
that
never
level?
got death
Probably just
threats,
under that level, huh?
but, you're not gonna, I think I tell it in the story, or maybe in the 7 Days thing, you
Yeah.
knock on a door, people you've known,
Wow,
many, many years.
just shut the door in your face or something,
Yeah,
or,
well, you're the fag lover, and slam.
wow,
But, since then, I try to tell people that, nothing's really going to change for the vast majority of people.
right,
And it hasn't.
yeah,
you know, but you know, I remember standing at the polls as politicians do,
Yeah,
and generally people would go in to vote and stuff. They'd come out, and you'd spend some time talking with them,
Yeah.
and
wow.
so many of these people, they wouldn't even look at you. You
Seriously, I mean, I can't
keep
imagine.
right on
that,
shuffling by. I said, well, I know where they went,
Yeah.
but that's
Gee,
okay.
But I mean, I
They-
can't imagine that. You're such a incredibly well-respected guy, and to run into that with people going just the other way must have been pretty wild.
Well, I came to believe that most of the people just couldn't wrap their arms around
Yeah.
the issue.
Yeah.
I mean, it was totally foreign to
I
anything
suspect
that
you're
we'd done.
right. Yeah.
And, you know, they weren't bad people.
Yeah,
It was something that they never considered,
yeah,
and I hadn't considered it really.
Yeah.
And anyway, they just couldn't wrap their arms around the issue.
yeah. Wow. Anyway, so then you never thought about running for the legislature again after that? Was that clearly it for the because Al Perry did come
Al
back
Perry did.
a term or two later.
You know,
But I think he probably had a better district. Seems like sounds like your legislative days were done with
I think that sealed them.
Yeah,
In fact, I never got asked to run again,
is that right?
which kind of surprised me.
Yeah, that's right.
I think I was a pretty good legislator, accomplished a fair amount.
It sounds like you were, and it sounds like those were years you really enjoyed. You would have been happy to have stayed there a lot longer.
Yeah, I love being in the
Is that right?
legislature.
No, it's always sounded, I can't imagine running for anything, but that's always sounded like a pretty cool job to do.
Yeah, you know, generally great people, no matter
Yeah.
their political stance.
Yeah,
And anyway, I just, I was never one of those guys that tell people how much they hate it and then run for their fifth term.
yeah.
But,
No, it's clear. No, I know you liked that job a
I
lot. I
did.
think you were very good at it.
no, I did. I
Yeah.
really enjoyed it.
But I can remember in the wake of that, I forget how much after that, but sitting down with you in Swanton, having tea or coffee with you, and again, you were quick to land on your feet because after that very difficult time for you, hey, when you become U.S. Marshal for Vermont. And that was because that got hung up for a while, I guess, in the
Yeah,
Senate.
it did. Well, it got hung up. Well, for one thing, we had 9/11 come along.
Okay,
But,
wow.
you know, Senator Jeffords had sent my nomination to the president,
Yeah,
and
as in George W., Republican
yeah,
George
George
Bush.
W. And then Senator Jeffords did his switch.
Right, from
He's-
Republican to Independent, changing
Right,
the
right.
makeup
He
of the
started
Senate.
caucusing with the Democrats.
Right, the singing Republican senators, I think, threw him out of
Yeah,
that group.
Out of that group. And so anyway, he went to, caucusing, and I get a call from the lady that I think was his chief of staff in Washington. I think her last name was Russ.
No, that sounds right. Susan Russ,
Yeah, I
maybe?
think
That
so.
sounds right.
And she says, John, I don't know what you're going to do,
Yeah.
but she says, we can't help you anymore.
Wow.
And, you know, when I was vying for the position with
Yeah.
Senator Jeffords,
Yeah,
Senator Jeffords didn't care whether anybody was a Republican, a Democrat,
Yeah.
an independent, whatever.
no, I thought Jeffrey, I was very high on Jim
And
Jeffords.
anyway, so I said, well, and I knew that a lot of Republicans were not, to say the least, happy with me.
Right,
So I said, I better start scrambling and get
wow,
some Republican people that will support me.
yeah,
So over time, I got most of the Senate Republicans and a big percentage of the House Republicans.
yeah,
I got, some, I guess they'd be Democrats if you had to classify them, but they were highly respected,
yeah.
that put
Maybe
in a
more
word.
blue dog Democrats, maybe, or
Yeah,
whatever.
they were just people that, some of them, I just knew them, they liked me.
Yeah,
And the name Jim Leddy comes to mind, which you
Wow.
may know that
yeah,
name. Anyway, I went to an interview with the Republican National Committee for Vermont. And there was Skip Valley,
Wow.
Sarah Gear, and who was the other one?
Just measured down to about three minutes here.
Yeah, no, and anyway, so I went in and did the interview,
Yeah.
came back and I said, oh, I'm shot. So anyway, I came home and I wrote 2 letters.
Huh.
One thanking the committee for their support, and the other one just lambasting them. And thank God. But anyway, things turned out good. I got fired from a job, got another one, paid me more than 10 times what that job
Wow,
did.
talk about landing on your feet.
Yeah.
And how many years in that job?
I had almost 8.
Wow.
Dave
Until the
DeMag, succeeded me there.
with the Democrat, with a Democrat.
Yeah.
Wow.
But I got to say, Senator Leahy was very helpful to
Yeah.
me.
Wow.
So
Nice to hear.
yeah.
And so that was a good job. That was an excellent
Oh,
job.
an excellent job.
Wow.
yeah.
So what office in Burlington? Just kept living in
I kept living in where I was
Yeah.
in Swanton, and I probably had the office in Burlington with the very best view.
Wow.
Looked
Was
out
that
over
right?
the lake and the Adirondacks,
Wow.
and the other windows looked up over Burlington and the Green Mountains.
Wow.
In fact, the judges, their offices were below mine.
Or right below
Yeah,
you?
so-
That's funny. In about a minute, can you just talk about, I think a lot of folks, U.S. Marshal, they know the term, but in about a minute, what did that job entail? What were the key parts of that
The
job?
key parts of that job are the security of the federal courts,
Okay.
the federal judiciary,
Yeah.
and it's up to the marshals to find jail space for federal prisoners that are awaiting trial or sentencing.
Interesting.
And here in Vermont, we generally had over 100 folks that were in the process of the courts.
Huh.
And we had them spread out in, I think it was 5 states. And so, it was a constant shuffling of, you'd bring people up that had court proceedings,
Yeah.
take somebody out because, the state only had so many beds for us.
Wow. So a very important job, but and I'm sure it had its stresses and stuff, but probably not like state police. You weren't called in the middle of the night too much on that job?
No, I never got called in the middle of the night.
Wow.
And it was just a different kind of law enforcement. We also served warrants,
Wow.
both federal, and we did a lot of work with state and local authorities on warrants that they had.
Wow. Wow, but it sounds like a very good 8 years.
It was.
Wow. John, we're out of time, but boy, I think we could knock off another hour easily, and maybe we will sometime. But again, such an impressive career and stuff. Anyway, great to have you on the show.
Well,
Thank you very much. John Edwards.
Thanks for inviting me.
Hey, thanks for having me. And thanks to my producer, Josh Pryor. I think Alan might have jumped in back there too. But anyway, thanks, producers. I'm Richard Cowperthwait. Thanks for watching us here on Northwest Access TV. We'll see you next time.